Welcome, fourth graders. This is your Inference mystery, the Mountain View Mansion Murder. Your lesson objective: I will make predictions and use evidence to support my opinion. I will make inferences and use evidence to support my predictions. The word evidence means clues, the proof, the confirmation, and in this lesson you're going to have a lot of clues to solve a mystery and to solve the murder. An opinion is your personal belief and thoughts. Your notes for the Mountain View Mansion Murder look like this. They're in Seesaw, and you're going to complete them at the end after we go over all of our clues. Then you're going to be a detective. You're going to put your detective hat on, and you're going to tell me what you think happened by writing 5 complete sentences using the evidence and the clues to support your inferences on who you think murdered Mr. Smith. So let's get started. The Mountain View Mansion Murder. You did this last week with the Inference murder mystery. You made predictions and inferences on who killed Miss Peabody. Today you're going to solve the new mystery, and you're going to try to solve by making inferences who killed Mr. Smith, who murdered Mr. Smith. And in Seesaw, you will complete the notes by typing in the red text boxes and then writing 5 complete sentences on the what I think happened. So let's get started. I'm going to read the short fiction intro. It was a dark and stormy night when Mr. Smith invited a few friends over for a party. He had just bought this stunning antique mansion on top of Mountain View Road and wanted his friends to see. Mr. Smith invited 6 friends over to celebrate. They were all close friends of Mr. Smith's, and he trusted all of them. The night began very well. The friends shared drinks and hors d'oeuvres, danced, and talked. Hors d'oeuvres just means small little snacks like snack size appetizers. They danced and talked. Mr. Smith was so pleased to see all of his friends together. And enjoying his new mansion. As the guests danced and carried on with their night, a shadowy figure was lurking in the hallway. Nobody could have imagined what was coming. In the middle of the merrymaking, the lights went out, and everything went black. All of the guests and Mr. Smith stopped what they were doing and shouted for an explanation. "Mr. Smith, where's the fuse box? We need to get these lights back on," said Mr. Alfaro. "It is around the back, behind the pool house. I'll go check it out," said Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith left the room to examine the fuse box. That's where they went to go check. The fuse box is what helps turn the lights on when they go off. When he did not return after 30 minutes, the guests began to worry. Miss Singleton suggested that somebody check on him. Mr. Mack and Mr. Bennet agreed. They went around to the pool house, and what they found was a shock. Mr. Smith was lying on the floor, unconscious and lifeless. So now it is your turn. Detectives, 4th graders are detectives today. Now it's time to make inferences, meaning predictions, and you're going to use evidence, the clues, to support your opinion. Let's make some inferences. The first clue, remember, at the end, I will show you what to write. So follow along with me. Let's get our brain warmed up. Let's look at these clues. Let's make inferences, and then I will let you know when it's time to fill out your notes. So don't write anything yet, because I'm going to let you know what you need to write on page 1 here. Mr. Smith was an admired and wealthy man, meaning he had money. Mrs. Swanson was very fond of Mr. Smith and enjoyed his company. Maybe Mrs. Swanson had a crush on Mr. Smith because it said She was very fond, meaning she liked Mr. Smith. Mr. Bennet was a colleague, meaning a co-worker. They worked together, of Mr. Smith, and they worked closely. So we can make an inference that they spend a lot of time together and that they have a good working friendship. Mr. Mack was a new friend to Mr. Smith's. They had recently met when Mr. Smith used him as a realtor to buy his new mansion. So we can make an inference that Mr. Mack is a realtor because we have the clue that says Mr. Smith used him to buy his new mansion. So that's his job, his profession for Mr. Mack. That's how they met. Mr. Smith was not married and did not have any children. His closest family member was Mrs. Reed. She was his only cousin. So they're related. They're cousins, they're family. Mr. Alfaro was the town's pharmacist. Now, Mr. Alfaro would be in charge of giving medicine out to the town. The town Mr. Smith lived in was called Dixie Springs. That's the setting of our fiction story. Miss Singleton was the town flirt. She loved to go on dates and meet new people. Mr. Smith was her next target. So maybe Miss Singleton had a crush on Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith lived alone. His closest neighbor was Mr. Bennet, and he lived 2 miles down the road. And that's not that close, apparently. When the lights went out, the guests were in the lounge dancing and playing pool. Before the murder happened, Miss Singleton noticed that a candlestick had been missing from a shelf in the lounge. And remember, the lights went out, and she noticed that a candlestick had gone missing before the lights went out, because no one expected that at the party. Mr. Mack had been seen leaving the lounge 5 minutes before the lights went out, and did not return until after the murder was discovered. So why did he leave? Why was he missing before the lights went out for 5 minutes? I mean, he didn't return until they found Mr. Smith's body. That was Mr. Mack. And we'll go over on what notes to write it after this. Mrs. Reed had invited Mr. Alfaro to the party. She thought it would be good for Mr. Smith to meet new people in town. And Mrs. Reed is Mr. Smith's cousin. Mr. Bennet did not like Mr. Mack. He thought he was a greedy and conceited man, meaning stuck up and full of himself. He told Mr. Smith to keep a distance. So he was looking out for his friend Mr. Smith. Mr. Bennet did not like Mr. Mack once again. Mr. Bennet always carried a pocket knife on him. Why would he need to carry a pocket knife? Mrs. Reed believed that because Mr. Smith had no children and no wife, she would inherit his wealth. Remember, they were cousins. She was the closest relative. Dixie Springs was a quiet and close-knit community, meaning everyone probably knows each other, because our clue says close-knit community. Miss Singleton saw Mr. Alfaro pour Mr. Smith a drink. So why is this clue important? Why would Mr. Alfaro pour Mr. Smith a drink? Mrs. Reed spent a lot of time with Mr. Alfaro at the party. They never left each other's side. Why were they together? Mrs. Reed and Mr. Alfaro. Then Mrs. Swanson and Mr. Smith were seen together just before the lights went out. So Mrs. Swanson knows a lot of information, make an inference on why they were together. Mr. Smith did not like Mrs. Reed. He only invited her because he knew that if he did not, she would spread bad rumors about him, and that's his cousin. That's sad. Mr. Alfaro was a discreet and timid man. Timid meaning he's very shy. Very shy. Mr. Mack was very fond of the old mansion that Mr. Smith bought, meaning he liked it. Mr. Bennet was the first to find Mr. Smith's body. Very important. Then, the last clue. The police officer on the scene stated that it looked like looked like Mr. Smith had been poisoned. So now we know the cause of death. So now, at this time, fourth graders, we're going to take our notes. But remember, our story is fiction because we have our characters. Our setting is the Mountain View mansion. They're all at the party. And they're in Dixie Springs. That's also the setting. And Mountain View Road is exactly where the mansion is located. The setting is the location. Our problem is Mr. Smith was murdered, and you have to figure out who, and that would be the solution. And the author's purpose for this murder mystery would be to entertain and amuse the reader, meaning you guys and myself. So now, please go to Seesaw. You're going to now go at your own pace. You're going to pause, and let's look at our notes. Let's take notes. Your notes look like this. They're blank. And I will be going through one suspect, one character at a time. I'll read the notes. They are written in my handwriting. And then you'll pause the video and you'll go to Seesaw and you'll type in the text box. The first suspect, the first person that you're going to be taking notes on. And these notes are all the clues, just condensed. Just the important parts. And we're not writing complete sentences. These are just phrases. So please go at your own pace and write this. Mrs. Swanson, please write, she was fond of Mr. Smith, was seen with Mr. Smith before the lights went out. That's it. 2 bullet points for Mrs. Swanson. So at this time, pause, go to Seesaw, and type it into the red text box. So pause it. I'm going to make sure that you are able to pause it so it's clear that you can see this. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. Mr. Bennett was a co-worker of Mr. Smith. He was the closest neighbor of Mr. Smith. He did not like Mr. Mack, carried a pocket knife, and was the first to find Mr. Smith's body. For this one, we have 5 bullet points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at this time, pause and type your notes for Mr. Bennett, our next suspect. And once again, you're going to Seesaw. We have 6 suspects: Mrs. Swanson, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Reed, Mr. Mack, Mr. Alfaro, Miss Singleton, and we'll take a couple of notes on Mr. Smith. He's not a suspect because he was the one that was murdered, but you do need to write some stuff down, some clues about Mr. Smith. So at this time, please take your notes over our suspect, Mr. Bennett. So pause and type in the Seesaw notes. Mrs. Reed was the cousin of Mr. Smith. Thinks she should inherit Mr. Smith's wealth, his money. Thinks she should have it. Spent time with Mr. Alfaro at the party and was not liked by Mr. Smith. This one has 4 bullet points, so write your notes on our suspect, Mrs. Reed. And once again, you are typing it in the red text box. So pause and type. Mr. Mack was a new friend of Mr. Smith. He was a realtor. He sells houses. Left 5 minutes before the lights went out and returned after the murder. He may be greedy, the clue said, and he liked Mr. Smith's mansion. So take your notes on Mr. Mack and write this and type it in the text box for our suspect, Mr. Mack in Seesaw. So pause and go to Seesaw and write this in. Our next suspect is Mr. Alfaro. He's the town's pharmacist. He's in charge of medicine, invited to the party by Mrs. Reed, poured Mr. Smith a drink, spent time with Mrs. Reed at party, and he's very timid and shy. 5 bullet points for Mr. Alfaro. A-L-F-A-R-O. Mr. Alfaro, our next suspect. So type in your notes, write exactly what I have in the red text box in Seesaw. So pause and write. Then we have Miss Singleton. Miss Singleton is the town flirt and loved meeting new people, was eyeing Mr. Smith as her next target. And notice candlestick missing. That's Miss Singleton, 3 bullet points worth of notes. So pause and write. Then for Mr. Smith, you need to know that he was poisoned, he lived alone and single. And there's a typo, it should not say alone. That was my bad. I was writing really fast. Even teachers make mistake. So it should say poisoned, lived alone with no D, alone, and single. And he's wealthy, meaning he's rich. So pause and write your notes. Type in the red text boxes and seesaw. So pause. Now, if you're hearing my voice, that means you're ready to solve the mystery. So now your notes should look like this. You've completed the notes in Seesaw. Now, for page 2, I want you to write 5 complete sentences, and each reason should use a clue to support it. Write 5 reasons why you think it's the person you selected. Use the evidence to back up your inferences. For example, let's solve the murder mystery. What do you think happened? Who murdered Mr. Smith? At this time, look at your clues on page 1 of your notes in Seesaw and write, once again, 5 complete sentences. Each reason should use a clue to support it. Write 5 reasons why you think it's the person you selected. Use the evidence to back up your inferences. Let's look at our example. Sentence. You would start off with the sentence starter, I think. Then you would write the suspect who you think murdered Mr. Smith. Now, I'm not saying Mr. Mack is the one who killed Mr. Smith. This is my example. I think Mr. Mack killed Mr. S. Mr. S meaning Mr. Smith. Because, notice how the word because is signifying that I'm about to use a clue after it. I think Mr. Mack killed Mr. S because he left 5 minutes before the lights went out. Notice how the clue is in orange. I used evidence, clues to support why I think Mr. Mack killed Mr. S. So 5 complete sentences. And then for the reveal, check the reading classroom inbox tomorrow, Wednesday, to find out who killed Mr. Smith. So now at this time, detectives, I want you to type in who you think murdered Mr. Smith on page 2. Type in and then delete these 3 dots. That's letting you know that's where you start writing your own words. 5 complete sentences. When you're done, click the green check mark. You know what to do. And have fun solving the Mountain View Mansion murder mystery. 4th graders, thank you for watching.